Welcome to Art in the Raw, the podcast that explores the bold, unapologetic, and often unseen art of queer creators. I'm your host, David Smith. Each episode, we sit down with queer artists from different disciplines to explore their inspirations, their struggles, and the narratives that shape their work. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Art in the Raw. I'm your host, David Smith. Today we have a fantastic guest joining us, someone whose work blurs the line between memory and intimacy, capturing the queer experience in a way that feels both deeply personal and universally resonant. Ben Seaman is a painter, a storyteller, and a creative force who spent years exploring the human figure, its form, its presence, and the narratives it holds. His journey is one of rediscovery, having stepped away from art to pursue a career in psychotherapy, only to be drawn back in with a renewed passion and a fresh perspective. His work isn't just about the body, it's about connection, about the spaces we inhabit, both physically and emotionally, and about the subtle, electrifying energy that exists between us. Ben's art exists at the intersection of realism and abstraction, where shadows define the composition, and the viewer is invited to fill in the light. He's exhibited across New York, created dual identities to explore different aspects of his work, and is now on a mission to integrate them, to present queer intimacy in a way that feels raw, honest, and above all, human. Today we're going to deep dive into his process, his inspirations, and even his latest creative risk, a short film exploring the complexities of queer relationships. We'll talk about his evolution as an artist, his influences, and what it means to truly see and be seen in the world of contemporary queer art. So grab a drink, settle in, and join me as we welcome Ben Seaman to Art in the Raw. All right, we're here with Ben Seaman for Art in the Raw. Appreciate you joining us, Ben. Good to see you again.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Ben and I met a while back on vacation, and I got to know him a little bit and see some of his art and was really impressed with his creativity. So I was really excited to have him join us for this podcast. So I'm going to hand it to you, Ben, a little bit. Tell us who is Ben Seaman?
Well, when I was in high school, I went to an art high school, and I had two interests. I wanted to be a therapist, and I wanted to be a painter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, who would take a therapist seriously at 19? So I went to art school. Art school was great, took me all kinds of places. But then once I was in the world of work, it was like, oh, I don't really know how this is going to work. And I was like, well, I'll try that therapy thing. And I threw myself into the therapy thing, really liked it. I loved seeing how people could change by having powerful conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Took it as far as I could go. But then one day I was looking at a website of Brene Brown. Some people in the therapy world have heard of her.
Yep,
and
I've
especially
heard of her.
you Texas guys have heard of her because
She's down in Houston.
She's that Texas lady. And that's fantastic.
Got it right here.
So I was looking at this website of hers, and I was like, damn, if these illustrations on her website aren't the best thing. And I just clicked on the credit, and it took me to this guy, Nicholas Wilton, who does these art workshops. And I was just like, what about doing art? And I clicked on it and ended up booking one of his workshops. And it just opened me back up to, you can do it. He was all about like, there's no obstacles, all this very new agey stuff. It was no surprise she and Brene and this guy were working together. And I took this workshop, and I just was opened up to like, I need to make my art. And just as I was getting back into it, the whole COVID thing happened. And all of a sudden we were like locked indoors. I'm doing all this painty stuff online with Nicholas Wilton, and it's great. But then I noticed all my queer friends are getting on these life drawing sessions, and we're doing life modeling by Zoom, and it's turning into this community. Like we're de-isolating by being on calls together. And I'm like, I really like the challenge of the figure. And I was doing all kinds of abstract-y stuff and some designy stuff. But I would always feel like, well, anyone can do that, but not everyone can do the figure. And something about the challenge of it made it feel like real art to me. And that's just my thing. You can do abstract art. There's nothing against abstract. But I just found looking at people's figure drawings, I would have this wow factor when someone really captured something that I didn't get from a lot of other art. And so I just was like, I'm going to learn how to paint the figure like I never learned before. And I just kept at it, and eventually was having shows in upstate New York. And then it turned into, I ended up actually creating two identities, one that was very queer erotic stuff and one that was sort of mainstream. Over the last couple of years, I've been working on integrating that, because there is something human and real about erotic stuff, but sometimes it would just have this kind of teenage boisterous look. I can paint sex and like just sort of saying fuck you to conservatives or something, or the general art audience. But then I had a one-man show in Brooklyn 2 years ago, and something about inviting everybody in my life to that, I realized I wanted to find an art that kind of walked that line, that didn't say, I'm afraid to show the gay side of my life, but didn't like make it so that only gay guys could get it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so I've just been working on what is that looking like. And I started to find there are paintings that are intensely erotic that are actually very subtle. Like if you look at Thomas Eakins, just boys jumping into a river,
Uh-huh.
there's something so erotic about that, and yet it's not prurient. It doesn't have this like, oh my God, my mom can't see this factor to it.
Right.
It just feels like natural human beauty, and I want to capture that. And I've even started finding like just sometimes like a picture of two guys riding a bus together can have this like erotic sizzle to it.
Just the
That
way they sit next
the
to
way
each
they
other,
look at each
the
other,
way they
and
look at each other.
just even just centering two guys in a painting instead of
Mm-hmm.
it being the typical man and woman has something to it. And along the way, I just also found that I was struggling with, do I want to be that like dab, 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 like perfect, almost photorealistic painter? Or do I want to be more splashy, painterly, whatever? And right now, what I'm working on is paintings that capture the shadows perfectly so that the rest of it kind of hangs off the shadows and creates a painting that holds together really tightly, but almost looks like an abstract painting. But in a
I
way,
love
like you
that.
could squint and see a photo or let go and just see brushstrokes.
Yeah. I've seen some other artists that will exclusively paint the shadows and let your
Yeah.
mind fill in
Yes.
where the light
Love
is.
that stuff.
Yeah, I love that stuff too.
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned a minute ago kind of your learning style and the challenge of painting the figure. Tell me a little bit about your growth in painting, how you evolved, and when you thought you got better, or did you ever think, okay, I've got it, I figured it out?
It's a great question. I mean, I don't know who in the audience has attended a life drawing class, but it's a very vulnerable experience because you look around and you're like, damn, that dude he just made one little mark and got the guy's profile perfect. And you look at yours and you're going like, ugh, I'm just like making sticks of hay here. Like, what's going on? And some of that is just loosening up. And even most life drawing classes have loosening up as part of the process. But there's just a point where you've drawn so many figures that you start to go, oh, I know what my hand's going to do. And you kind of like don't stay so much in your mind anymore and stuff. Kind of just trust like, how far off can a drawing possibly be? Like, just get in there and start drawing. And you start to say like, okay, I'm starting to see, I know what my style kind of looks like. Then I started actually like, some people will call it cheating, but I started using grids. And I took a class with a woman named Catherine Kehoe, who actually grids out all of her work. She takes a photo and draws grids over it and then transfers it to a painting. And she draws actually straight lines between all the different important points of a figure and creates all these abstract shapes out of it. And I just started to go like, oh, it doesn't even have to be about perfect like hand-to-eye coordination. It can be about mapping out the painting almost more like a design project. And so now all my paintings start with a grid underneath. It's usually like a very bright orange underpainting with a grid on top. And then I can look at a photo with the grid on it and pretty much grab the shadows pretty quickly in a way that feels like artistic, not just slave to the photo. And then that kind of sets me up. I have a painting that's basically black and orange. And then you can just hang all the colors on it any way you want. And just creates lots of beautiful effects. And it's sort of like where I'm at in terms of a technique.
Do you work primarily from photos of models, or do you work
Yeah.
with live models too?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question. So, like, I found that, like, okay, life drawing class, fun. I come up with some drawings, but they never look like something I would say, well, this is what I want to stand for, is dude sitting on a chair. So I started inviting models to come model for me. And what I found was in 2 hours of just snapping the camera, no photo experience whatsoever, but just playing around, saying, take off your shirt, put your shirt back on, sit in this chair, just lots of playing around. I started to get positions and takes that I would never thought of that had a lot of story in them. And then I realized, why not bring a second person in here? And so when I started to do shoots with two people, that's when I started to get like, okay, here's like one guy at the far end of the room, another guy looking at him from like right next to the viewer. It really sets up these dramatic tensions that made me go,
It
okay,
tells a story.
now I'm creating compositions with a story in it. And I have the photo, so I don't have to make the poor model stand there like this for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Or 10 hours. Like I have a figure painter friend who says she has models come back for 3 days in a row, 10 hours at a time.
My.
And I'm like, those poor models.
Wow.
And, yeah, I just couldn't do that to somebody.
I'm going to share that story with the models that we use, because we host drink and draw events at the local Eagle here in Dallas.
Yeah.
And I'll use that story whenever the models say that they're not sure they can handle 20 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah. Great.
So take us back a little bit to your earliest artistic influence. What were there specific artists that influenced you, experiences? Or?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I was in arts high school in the 80s when it was David Sally, Julian Schnabel, Eric Fischel, who were very kind of what they called neo-expressionist, where they were doing figures, but they were adding something very conceptual to it. Eric Fischel was painting scenes that maybe no one should see, like a boy jerking off in an inflatable swimming pool. Or there's another one I think of, a boy looking in on his mother as she's lying nude on her bed. And they just had this kind of like voyeuristic quality to them. David Sally did very Sigmar Polke-like collage compositions that seemed mind-blowing at the time. I've since seen his roots in a lot of German conceptual artists. He also had a very voyeuristic quality to the figurative part of his paintings. And then Schnabel was, I would say, his influence was just that almost anything can be a painting. Throw anything at the canvas, and you call it art, it's art. And that just has always been there underneath everything. I'm almost embarrassed to quote these guys because they're like the big bad boy people of the 80s, and I've since grown very tired of their very hetero regime.
It was the 80s.
It was the 80s. It was what was cool at the time. And now I've just dug much more into women painters, especially women figurative painters, like Susan Lichtman, who's up in Massachusetts, Catherine Kehoe, I just think is a genius. Um, uh, Her partner Nancy also does amazing, amazing work. Um, and so I'm sort of hovering between following true like figure painters, uh, and creating something that's a little more conceptual. And not going to lie, tagging along the new resurgence in queer figure painters that is really big right now.
Yeah. So is that kind of when you realized the type of art that you wanted to do was figurative, or did you also think that you wanted to focus on some other types of art like abstract or
Yeah,
still life
it's
or
a great
something like
question.
that?
In art school, I was very geometric, abstract, and occasionally I would like mix figures in there, but it would be in some kind of a quoting kind of way. Like one of my thesis paintings was a picture of a indigenous American on a cliff as a UFO is landing, but it painted completely satirizing like the illustrational children's books of the 50s. And so it was more about quoting a painting rather than enjoying a figure painting.
Yep.
And I did a lot of paintings like that that snuck figure in that way. Uh, it was a lot of work to try to replicate a painting style I'd never even mastered. And so when I came back to figure, it was like discovering, oh, there can be pleasure in figure painting, and uh, it's much more fun. So, and there was something a little kind of removed about quoting a painting. Now it's like I'm painting a real person, and I feel like the humanity comes through more.
So a friend of mine I was showing some of your work to mentioned that he felt like your paintings feel like they kind of exist in this space between a memory and
Mm.
intimacy. Almost
Yeah,
like when you look at the painting, you're like, am I looking at something that's being remembered or recalled,
I
or am I
love
looking at
hearing that.
something that is just an immediate, intimate moment? How do you create that feeling in your work, or is
That
that
is, I
something
mean,
you
first of all, that is
try?
just the best compliment because it is literally what I feel like I'm striving for is to give the sense of like something remembered or dreamt, or maybe even something somewhat drug induced, but just something where it's not clear what's happening and or how real it is. I would say probably the main way that I'm achieving that is by working from photos because the photo already removes it one step, and it is rather obvious if you were to look at all the paintings I've done in the last 5 years, the ones that are from life, which tend to just be my own self portraits, they don't have that quality exactly. And I could even uh, I'd have to like dig through my photo file, but you can see the photo portraits that were from a mirror and from a photo, and the ones from the photo have that dreamy quality, like a sort of a flash memory. So I would say that's the main way I achieve that.
That's beautiful. Um,
Thanks for that.
you did mention that you've got a background in psychotherapy or psychology. Um, how do you use that knowledge of the human mind to influence your creations?
It's a great question. I'm not sure I've ever thought about it consciously, but I did find that there was something very edgy for me directing a photo shoot because as a therapist, there's a way that I try to put myself in the background and let the space be taken up by the client. And there's, on the one hand, people tell me they feel very safe around me. And I'm sure that's something that comes from being a therapist, that whatever that is, the ability to put your stuff to the one side so you're not like in someone's face with your stuff, uh, that must be something that sort of comes out in the photos, that there's some kind of vulnerability that's possible. But it has been such a growth experience to realize the model does not know what they want to do. They're here for your service, and I have to tell them what to do. And it is a complete energy shift. It's almost like going from bottom to top or top to bottom. We could discuss all day which role is which in a therapy office, but it very much feels like switching sexual positions.
Yeah, I kind of feel that myself, not to talk about me too much, but when I'm doing photography, I struggle to figure out how to
Yeah,
tell the model how to stand, what to do. I want to
yeah,
capture kind of the natural moments, and I feel like just
yes,
posing them kind of removes the whole
absolutely.
natural state of it.
Yeah, and then how
Um,
do you direct them to do something that ends up appearing natural? And it
it's
feels a
hard to
little
do.
silly to tell your friend, all right, now just dance a little crazy. But they need you to tell them because they're like,
Otherwise, they're like, "What do you
I
want me
don't
to
know. Yep.
do?" So how do you navigate the balance between your personal storytelling and a broader representation? And by that I mean in your art, how much of your art has your own personal story and what
Mm,
you're conveying, um, and how much of it is more of a broader representation of queer identity?
that is a great question. I would say,
I'm
first
knocking
of
these great
all,
questions out of the
yeah,
park, man.
these are great. I mean, first of all, I am not the guy that like, I have a bad day and so I go and paint about it. I mostly can't do direct translation like that. There's some people that like get it all out and it's like their painting is their self-expression.
Hmm.
I would say I'm more the type of painter that has ideas come to him and I try to figure out how to execute them as best as I possibly can. And for people that really want to geek out on this stuff, there's a concept that comes from Nietzsche about Dionysian versus Apollonian art making. Dionysian being just drunk wine, it all flows out of you, super abstract, messy, gory, whatever. The Apollonian is like the Greek sculptor who wanted to make a perfect sculpture of Apollo that would honor the gods. And so it's more like having an ideal that you work towards. So I'm more on the Apollonian side of things. But that said, I definitely want to communicate that queer people exist and that we have relationships straight people may never understand, and that we have intimacies that aren't don't even seem to be available to straight people without a lot of commotion, and that I want to kind of make us visible to the world and in a way that is just putting it out there, not saying it's better than, not saying it's worse than, but the realities of it. And right now I'm working on a short film about a scruff hookup that's just meant to say a scruff hookup isn't simple. It can be full of anxiety, awkwardness, missteps, stumbling, and all kinds of like social and class issues. And
Hmm.
I want to make that real for people. Or
One of
something
the
between,
things that I
yeah.
love about queer art, um, and I think your art does a good job of this too by showing the basic intimacy without making it overtly sexual,
Uh huh.
is that for straight people, it gives them of a view into the realization that queer people and queer love isn't that different from
Mm-hmm.
straight people and straight love. We still have the same desires, and wants and needs. Um, and at the same time, it shows them that we do things, we have relationships, and intimate moments that maybe they really kind of want, but are afraid because of societal pressures to allow themselves to have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it kind of opens that whole world up to them. And for some, I think that scares them. And for some, I think that draws them in.
Yeah. Some of my straight clients tell me they are jealous of the relationships they perceive me to have.
Wow. I do think sometimes we as gay men work pretty hard on our relationships because when you get them, you have to cherish them,
Yeah.
um, and nurture them. The
Mhm.
keyword nurture takes a lot of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
Um, so have you faced any resistance to that to any of the intimacy in your work? Have you
Yeah, it's
people
interesting.
push
Like,
back?
I have had family members say, okay, that's enough of the male nudes on Facebook. And I'm sort of like, you chose to have me
Follow
on your
me.
Facebook feed. Like, come on. Like, I scroll past the posts of yours that I don't care for. I don't feel the need to weigh in and say, tone that down. Um, Mostly I've been surprised how warm the reception is. I expected a lot of people, maybe from my therapy community, to be like, oh, I don't know about that. Like, what if a client sees it? And haven't really had much of that at all. So it's
Maybe
been
the client will
interesting.
see it and it'll spur them to open up about something.
Yeah, whatever it is. And at some point, it's like the therapist is a person. They shouldn't have to keep their whole life in a closet to do their job.
So I'm going to read this out because this question is coming from a past interview that I heard that you did. Um, in a past interview, you talked about how identifying too strongly with emotions, like being upset, can actually block your creativity. So
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
feel like I'm upset, then that blocks you from being creative. And you shared an exercise about writing those negative thoughts on a canvas and painting over it.
Yeah.
Um, has that is that something you still do? Has that evolved for you? Does that still work for you?
Uh, I would say it's definitely there if I ever really need it. Uh, I really just try to preserve my peace of mind so that art day is art day. Um, I would say one of the best things I've come up with, this is my newest thing, is I write myself an email on art day and I try to embody like my highest spiritual guide and speak to myself from that guide's position. And I would say it would sound like the voice of like your favorite art teacher saying, I know you're upset about something. Maybe you can do a little bit of meditation on that and then set it aside because you have these two projects you promised. And I know that you're also really excited to paint that painting of your friend that you just took a picture of. Why don't you make that your reward for getting these two projects done this morning? And then on the afternoon session, we can start this other thing. And
I love that.
it's full of compassion and accountability so that I'm not in the I don't feel like getting started place, and it's not in the this is going to be some burden place. It's just right down the middle. We're here to do some real work and do it well, and not devoid of humanity, but not run by our smallest quibbles.
That reminds me a lot of I don't know if you've studied The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron.
Yeah, a long time ago. I don't remember much of it. I just remember doing my morning pages.
Yeah, that is the hardest part
Yeah.
of The Artist's Way. But there's
Is there
a
something about that in there or about?
well, yeah, there's something about that about how in all of us is this artistic child. And when you
Yes.
were a child, you would draw and you wouldn't have any of these preconceived stresses or emotions
Right.
or notions about you would just draw because you were having fun drawing.
Totally.
And part of the artist's way is taking care of that inner child to let them know that
Absolutely.
it's okay to just go be creative. And it sounds
Yeah.
like that's exactly what you're doing with that. I love that.
Absolutely. And it's definitely I'm trying to I often think about a sandcastle, like the kind of energy of like I can't wait to get to the beach because I'm going to build a sandcastle that looks like this. And you're just so excited and your excitement is the same amount as the challenge. Because if the challenge is too high, you just get crushed. And if it's too low, you get bored.
Yep.
And so it's like
You need
that
that balance.
sandcastle has to be like it has to have a couple extra wings and some turrets, and it's got to have enough to be like this is going to be amazing.
Cool.
Yeah. So
Um, so what's one of the biggest creative risks you've taken that you were glad you took?
definitely shooting this film that I'm still editing, which was to basically ask two friends to have a hookup and let me film them.
Oh wow.
And uh, it was very awkward to say, we need to do that again, but I need to film it from this angle. And they're like, us, we were just making out, and okay. And really try to like heighten the drama part of it and not get stuck on, well, this is just two naked dudes and how exciting is that? But um and very little of it, I don't want to be clear, very little of it is sex. It's the knocking on the door, letting someone into your apartment, negotiating like what is it like to be on this date with each other. But it it just felt very raw in so many ways. Number one, because I've never even shot a movie before, so and
I'm sure that
I've
was an
got
interesting learning experience.
I learned a lot. I learned next time have a script.
Yeah. That's
I
why I have questions in front of
I
me because
thought
I will
ad
forget them.
lib would get us pretty far, and it did. But next time there'll be a script. Um, yeah, and it's
Well, that's
just
awesome.
vulnerable to be like, I don't know how to shoot a movie, but would you guys be actors for me? Like, and fortunately, they were very sort of into that rawness also. So,
So plug your movie a little bit. What give us some more details. When are you going to release it? Do you know?
oh my God, no, now you're gonna hold me accountable. Okay, let's say September. There will be a
Okay.
short art film coming out
Okay.
that
Well, I'm
that
excited
yeah.
to see it, and maybe we can do this podcast again when it comes out and talk about it.
All right,
I would love that.
that's
Um,
exciting.
so let's talk a little bit about kind of the legacy of your art and kind of your future aspirations. If someone were to look at your body of work years from now, what do you hope they take away from it?
Wow. Not sure if it would be any different from what I want them to get from it now. Uh, Considering the current administration, I think I would want them to know there were gay people once. Because
There
at
always
this
have
point,
been. There always will be.
there always will be. I just, I mean, I know it's a ridiculous comparison, but when you see those pictures of Iranian women in 60s mod fashions and that's all gone, you're like, maybe it could happen here.
I hope not.
So maybe at the very least, it's just a time capsule to say when this administration is in the grave, you can resurrect all this. But not even going that dark. Um, I guess it would be nice to think that the record of the process is there, that someone can say, oh, I see how he went from basic life drawing class to paintings that, God knows where they'll go. They might get much bigger, much more complex, much more nuanced. It would just be great to say, here's somebody who tried to keep growing. I guess that's what I would like people to see is this is a guy who didn't stop at good enough, but challenged himself to keep growing.
I love that. That's all there is in life is to keep growing,
Yeah.
have a learning mindset. Um, what advice would you give to other emerging queer artists who are still finding their voice and getting their artistic career started?
Another great question. I would say absolutely believe in yourself, and anything that makes you not believe in yourself, get it out of your life as soon as you can, and absolutely count the number of weeks, months, and years you think you have left in your life, and ask yourself if that's how many dollars you had, how would you spend them? Because life is really short, and I wish I could tell 30-year-old Ben who was glad to give up art for a while and try another career. I wish I could tell him, don't put it aside, just tone it down so that you're not losing that time. But who knows? Maybe it had to go to sleep completely for me to come back roaring at it. But
Time is the most valuable commodity.
yeah, that's the one thing that you can't get back.
All right, so now's that time, the end of the interview. We're going to turn up the heat and get real and raw. We're going to this is my take on the questions made famous by James Lipton from Inside the Actor's Studio,
Okay.
these famous 10 questions with an artistic twist. What is your favorite artistic medium or tool?
All the paints that dry really fast, like gouache and acrylic.
What artistic trend or cliche do you wish would disappear?
Oh my God, give me 1 second. If I never see another soup can imitating Warhol, it'll be too soon.
What fuels your creativity the most?
I would say seeing other really good paintings.
What sound
And
or
you know what
noise?
else? TV shows and movies with some nudity in them.
Yeah, that does inspire me too. What sound or noise instantly inspires you?
Philip Glass.
What's
Certain chill Latin American jazz performers.
nice?
Yeah.
That's good background music for
Yeah.
doing art. What sound or noise completely kills your focus?
There are a number of iPhone ringtones that I would like to outlaw. If I was president, that would be my executive order. These ringtones are out.
What's your favorite word or phrase to include in your work, literally or metaphorically? Easy for me to say.
Come with me.
If you could see any queer artist, living or dead, honored with a major public monument, who would it be?
Living or dead. Oh. Maybe Thomas Eakins. Hard one. Fairfield Porter. There's too many to name. It's too many.
What's one profession or creative field you could never see yourself in?
Accounting.
If your art could take on a life of its own, what form would it take?
It would, I think it would be, I don't know what it's called, theater where you don't know who is one of the guests of the performance and who's one of the actors. Like Sleep No More is an example of that. It's a multi-story warehouse in New York. I don't know if it's still running, but things are taking place and people interact with you and you don't know if they're guests like you that paid to be there or they're actors putting on some type of situation, or it's in doubt. It is actually pretty clear. It's just that they do get in your face and you're not able to, you are forced to interact with it.
Kind of makes you part of the play.
Yeah.
And then finally, if an afterlife exists, what do you hope your art says about you to those who find it in the future? Which I think we kind of had that question earlier.
I guess that he had fun.
Yeah, he had fun. He did good. Ben, it was really good to see you again.
This was so fun. It was great to see you.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to hopefully running into you in Spain sometime
I
soon.
still want to get to Dallas and get to one of your life drawing sessions.
Come on, you just let me know and you got a place to stay.
Great.
All right.
Back at you.
All right. Thanks for listening or watching. If you love this show, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps us bring more visibility to queer artists and their work. And check out our website at salonnatural.art for more queer art events and discussions.